I was almost killed by my ex-boyfriend, and I'll be changing the names to protect myself. Now, I'll start with a quick backstory. At the time of the attack, I was 19, almost 20. My ex, Gavin, was 27, and we had a big chow-chow and a cat. The dog was his and the cat was mine. We lived in a 3-bedroom house. A few months before, we had allowed a friend to stay with us, Lacey, and it didn't end well, as she was just sort of taking advantage of us. The week leading up to the attack, Gavin had just gotten back from his work trip, which I believe was about 3 to 4 weeks away from home. And the week that he was back, he was completely out of it, unable to complete a thought. I'd ask or tell him something, and less than 5 minutes later, he'd completely forget or just not have heard me, just off in some other world almost. And one day, I was very frustrated with all of this, and I'd ask for help with chores or for him to take the garbage out, only to be ignored. One day, he said that if it continued, he wanted me to slap him. Now, we had gone out for dinner with his mom 2 days prior to this attack, and she was obviously very worried about him, as there was clearly something wrong. And at the time, the only mental disorder that he had or was aware of was OCD, though I am now even more convinced that it's not what he had by any means. And the day of the attack, we had just gotten back from grabbing some takeout, and were sitting on the couch in the living room. I had been painting my nails while he was playing Mario Kart, and he looked over at me and said, "Lacey put a curse on my family." I was dealing with my own really poor mental health at the time, so I wasn't really in a space where I could be focusing on his. I have BPD, and I wasn't sure what to do. So I suggested that he hop in a cold shower, as it had helped him earlier in the week to reset a bit. He walked into the bathroom, muttering to himself, and it just felt so off. Now, I don't know how to describe it. I just didn't feel safe. And I walked over and asked if I could call his mom for a bit, maybe invite her over for supper, kind of beating around the bush that I wanted her to come help him. He looked at me and just started yelling that all he needed was me. I walked out and started toward the living room as I was calling his mom. He came out of the bathroom naked and started yelling at Ollie, the dog, to discipline me and attack me. Mind you, he was trained as my guard dog. And at this point, I believe his mom had answered the phone and heard what was happening. He started calling me Lacey and saying that I needed to pay for what I did. I immediately ran into the bedroom with my phone, and his mom was still on the line. He kicked down the door, smashed my head into our mirrored closet doors, and threw my phone to the ground. He was screaming that he was going to kill me. I scrambled out of the bedroom, trying to get to the front door, and as I was passing the kitchen, he got a hold of me and wrapped his arms around my throat, again saying that he was going to kill me. I remember looking over to the table and seeing my cat, Sterling, all puffed up, and I had never seen him so scared. I was fighting to not go unconscious, and I couldn't breathe. I clawed at him, just trying to get his arms off my throat. I remember starting to see black specks in my vision and thinking, am I going to die? What is he going to do with my body? Then he started asking me if I knew what it was like to have unspeakable things done to me. And this is the part where I'm not sure if he was actually out of his mind. I have been assaulted inappropriately before, and it had been a year that month, I guess, and I was very open about how that had been affecting me and open about telling him. He threw me to the ground and put his foot over my head as if to stomp on it. And this was the only time that I had seen his eyes throughout this attack, and they were almost lifeless. His pupils were so dilated you could barely see the iris, and he was yelling over and over again, "Admit it, Lacey. You know what you did. Admit it." I just started apologizing, doing and saying anything I could to make him happy. And this seemed to work as I got the opportunity to scramble to my feet and race out the door, and I just wished that I'd left the screen door open. I ran from house to house in nothing but shorts and a sweater in February in one of the coldest provinces in Canada. I got into maybe 2 to 3 houses before I heard Ollie screaming, and it's a sound I can never get out of my head. I just dropped to the ground, screaming and crying, "Gavin, leave him alone," as I knew in that moment that he killed my dog. At this point, a bunch of the neighbors had heard me and came running to help. An older couple called the police and brought me into their home, not knowing if they were putting their own lives at risk. My parents were living in a completely different province. Someone gave me their phone to call my mom, and she was out for supper with some friends, and I just told her Gavin killed the dog and tried to kill me. The police finally showed up after what seemed like hours, 5 or 6 cars, firearms out and ready. They used a megaphone to tell him to come out with his hands up, and he walked out naked, covered in blood. Once they had gotten him into the car, a police officer came to talk to me while the others searched the house. And shortly after, an officer came up and asked how many dogs we had, and I told him 1 and a cat. I asked if Ollie was still alive, and they told me that he was dead in the bathtub. Gavin had killed him in the living room and then brought him into the bathroom, filled up the tub, and put Ollie's body in it. I asked about the cat, and they said they couldn't find him yet, and I was sure that he had killed my sweet boy too. Sterling was the only thing I could think about, and I went into a panic and was no longer able to give them any more information. I was in tunnel vision repeating, "Where's my cat? I want my cat. Find my cat." The officers asked if there were any treats that they could use to coax him out and where his hiding spots usually were, and they ended up finding Sterling alive, but he was so scared and attacking the officers. They had blocked off the worst of the scene, so they had me go in to get him. There was still so much blood, and the smell of blood and feces was overpowering. Sterling was in the bedroom on the bed, just crying. I scooped him up and asked the officers to find my vape, and as I was walking out of the house, Gavin's mom had just gotten out of her car. She asked me where Ollie was, and all I could say was, "Gavin killed him." And she just dropped to the ground and started bawling. 2 weeks later, Sterling and I were on a plane to my mom's. The court case took over 2 years, and I later found out Gavin had loaded our guns, and I never wanted to know how he killed Ollie, but when going through the evidence, an officer mentioned a baseball bat, not knowing that I didn't want to know. He only got 10 months of house arrest for all of this, and to this day, 2 years later, he still tries to contact me, blaming me for not getting him help earlier. And I think the worst part is that I do partly blame myself. This happened to me in Tempe, Arizona, not far from Mill Avenue where all the bars are at. I was out bar hopping with a group of friends one weekend, having a good time, and had gotten pretty wasted. I have this terrible habit of wandering off and getting lost when I drink, and this particular night I had managed to get myself in a very dumb situation. After wandering down streets for almost an hour, I started to realize that I was very lost, and to make things worse, my phone was out of battery. At some point, I decided that I would just walk back to my friend's house, which I knew was somewhere north of an area that we were bar hopping. Now, I should mention that I am severely incompetent when it comes to directions and navigating in a city, so I didn't realize that I was a solid 7 to 8 miles away from my friend's place. As I was stumbling confidently along the empty roads at 2 a.m., a sedan suddenly pulls off the road in front of me, aggressively, almost blocking my path. Somewhat startled, I look towards the driver's side and see a rather large and mean-looking black gentleman staring me down. In situations like this, most people have one of 2 reactions. They either become scared and defensive, or angry and aggressive. I, on the other hand, am an insane person and was just drunk enough to have no sense of the danger that I might be in. Now, I should mention that I am your typical privileged suburban white boy, not particularly threatening or big. And I proceeded to wave at the guy, saying, "Hey man, what's good?" I'm not completely sure, but I think I was probably smiling too. I specifically remember the face that he made. It was sort of confused and conflicted, as if I were asking him what year it was. He paused for a second and asked me something, but I couldn't understand what he said. And I responded back, "Huh?" And he then asked me, "Where you going?" I told him I was trying to walk to my friend's place, but I have no idea where I am. After another pause, he told me to get in. Now, without thinking, I walked over to the passenger side and hopped in. Pretty dumb, right? Well, at the time, it seemed like a good idea. And once I got in, I was able to get a better look at the guy. He was covered in tattoos and was wearing your typical thug attire. I also noticed his arm was all bandaged. Oh, and he had a pistol clearly tucked into his shorts. And again, for some reason, none of this fazed me at the time. He asked me where my friend's place was, and I gave him directions. Now, I'm pretty sociable and talkative when I drink, so I immediately started chatting with the guy casually. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but eventually he started telling me that he had just gotten out of the hospital after being treated for a gunshot wound on his arm, and his girl just broke up with him because of it. Apparently, she didn't like that he was in a gang and getting into gunfights. Go figure. He then told me that he was real pissed off about her and about getting shot, and he was driving around looking for someone to rob when he found me, and that he has served time for robbery in the past. At that point, my drunken brain started to connect the dots, and I thought about the roughly $200 that I had in my wallet at that very moment. But instead of freaking out, I just said something like, "Damn, man, that's rough." He also told me that he really wanted to be a rapper, and he was trying to get his music career started. I tried to be supportive, telling him to just go for it. About 10 to 15 minutes later, we pulled up at my friend's place. Now, this is when I should have just gotten out of the car and told the armed man thanks for the ride, but again, I'm an insane person and felt like I owed him one for taking me all the way there, so I asked if he wanted to come in and smoke some, and he said he was down. At this point, my friends had already been back for a while and were all wondering what had happened to me. And as you might expect, they were awfully surprised when I showed up with a strange black guy who I now knew was a gang member who had debated robbing me at gunpoint. What the dude did next sort of sketched everyone out, though. My buddy lives in a house with a few other people. His room is at the very end of the hallway, and that's where they all were listening to music. He also has a huge safe in his closet that is visible as soon as you walk in the room. I didn't realize it, but my new friend had brought his gun inside with him, and shortly after entering the room after everyone said what's up, he took his gun out of his waistband and put it down right on top of the safe in front of everyone. It seemed like a really odd thing to do, but it was a lot better than what he could have done. I feel like it was a sort of show of respect, like he wanted to show that he wasn't going to use it. Luckily, I do have super chill friends, so they acted cool and were about to roll up a blunt, so a few minutes later we all went back to smoke, leaving that gun in his room. The dude chilled with us for a while longer and actually seemed to get along with some of my friends who had a similar interest in music. He then picked up his gun off the safe and left without incident. Looking back, I realized that that could have gone much, much worse, especially since my buddy had a lot of cash in that safe and could have easily robbed us at gunpoint at any time. And I like to think that although he was a criminal and a gang member, he was also just a guy going through a hard time, and a little kindness and marijuana prevented that night from going very, very bad. This happened over 10 years ago, but I still think about how close I came to dying. I was already with my future husband when I met his cousin, and we had a lot in common. We both struggled with addiction and anorexia. We talked on the phone and met up to eat and see a movie, but he kissed me in his car, so I decided it was best if we just stopped talking. I told my future husband about the kiss, and he was understanding. I didn't tell him that his cousin got extremely upset over me turning him down. Some time passed, and we started meeting up as friends. Since we were both starving ourselves, we always went to the same place, but after a couple of times, I felt like it wasn't healthy for either of us to meet up. He asked me to meet up one last time, and I stupidly said yes. We went to our place, and during dinner, he was talking about his apartment and job, how happy he could make me. I got uncomfortable and asked him to drive me home. It was really late, and instead of driving me home, he drove me to the forest preserve. It was pitch black because all the lights were off, and I immediately felt uneasy. We were alone in the parking lot, and I had a horrible feeling at this point that something was going to happen. He parked and turned off his car and then looked at me and said that we were meant for each other. I didn't want to upset him, so I just said that he knew that I was engaged and that we were just friends. He had a history of violence, so I was terrified at that point. He started getting really upset, and almost crying. He said that he loved me. Then he put his arm around my neck and held his arm down really hard on the right side of my neck. His arm was around my neck, and I'd been looking straight ahead when suddenly I woke up to a police officer at his window. He was asking if I was okay, and I was really scared and confused, and I had some vomit on my shirt and I'd wet my pants. He'd pressed down on my carotid artery for long enough that it actually knocked me out, and he was a wrestler back in high school. He was telling the officer that we were fine, and that I was drunk. He got a ticket, but I was too afraid to say anything because if he was arrested, my now husband's family wouldn't have blamed me, but that's what I thought in the moment. I said it was fine, but that I wanted to go home now. I thought if I said it in front of the officer, he would drive me home because he took our names and he wouldn't risk trying something else. So he drove me home and didn't say anything. I don't know if he was trying to kill me or just got so upset that he went way overboard. Regardless, he almost did kill me, and it really messed me up. A person doesn't vomit and wet themselves after a neck compression unless they almost died. And I told my now husband, but not right away because I felt like it was partly my fault for meeting up with him. I only saw him a couple of more times at the holidays, and then he stopped coming. but he didn't dare speak to me after what he did. If that officer hadn't shown up, I don't know if I'd be here still. Surprisingly, this is one of those stories I forgot about until a few days ago when I was talking to a school friend on call and I got reminded of this. She was pretty freaked when I told her. You see, this happened when I was roughly maybe 7 or 8, so some of the details are a bit fuzzy, but I remember it pretty vividly. This may seem like unimportant context, but my family had just moved to America and were renting the top portion of your regular suburban house in a pretty safe cul-de-sac. I had friends, they were triplets, about 3 or 4 houses down. Not far at all, and every day I'd go hang out with them, and around 9 or 10 in the night, my older brother, around 11 or 12 I'd say, would make the 2-minute walk and come and get me and walk me home since I was pretty young. One night he came to get me as usual. The sun wasn't fully down, but it was getting pretty dark. We started down the walk as normal when he started casting glances over his shoulder. I didn't really notice until he shoved me hard away from the sidewalk and between 2 houses. Each house had a huge fence that separated their backyard, not ours though, and he'd made me crouch behind the fence. I remember being really scared, but more confused since I had no damn idea what the hell was going on. More specifically, he was a pretty big prankster. Once he convinced me my older sister crashed her car into the ocean, so I didn't really believe him when he turned and said, "Walk behind the houses. I think someone's following us." Now, looking back now, he was probably trying to keep me calm. However, whatever calm was left in my tiny 8-year-old body was gone the moment that I turned around and looked. The man had followed us behind the houses, and he was just by the edge of a few houses down near a different fence line. He had a black hoodie on, with the hood up, black sweatpants, and white sneakers. I had pretty bad eyesight due to some health problems, but back then it was crystal clear, and I could see with horrifying clarity that his jaw was just hanging open, like he was just standing there with his jaw hung open. It was horrifying. I think now that I'm older, maybe he had some kind of medical condition that affected his jaw, or maybe he did crack, I don't know. But back then, I could have sworn on God that I was seeing some kind of demon. Now anyway, my brother, when he saw that I was looking and getting ready to freak out, he told me, "Just run, as fast as I can to our house." And we booked it. Neither of us looked back, but we were so scared out of our minds. And like I said, we only rented the top portion of the house, so the bottom, with a sliding door in the backyard, belonged to some other tenant. I don't remember if she was home or not, but I remember tugging that thing open and locking it as fast as I can, and when I looked up, he was there in the yard, a little away from the door, just staring at us, with that jaw. Me and my brother told my sister and my mother immediately. My father was away for a work trip at the time, but nothing came of it. Not until the day after. We went to meet my dad at his warehouse, which had a small live-in portion above it where we lazed around until he was ready to head home with us. Around dusk, he came up and told us that we might have to wait since the police were there. He walked us around to the back window of the small area to show us police officers all around the backyard area of the warehouses. There were a few in line, and a white van parked on the grass by the edge of the woods. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I don't remember many details of what actually happened, but I do remember my dad, who hadn't been told about the day prior, telling us that they found a man and a woman in the van. The man, he said, had his mouth hanging wide open. He seemed really disturbed while telling me about the whole thing and wouldn't answer any more questions about the woman. Maybe she was dead. I have zero idea. I do know that they were arrested on trespassing charges. I don't know anything else, and I haven't asked about it. I doubt that he'd remember. It's been over a decade, and he's pushing 70, but it freaks me out to this day. I still can't believe it happened, and I don't have any answers for it. I talked to my brother briefly about it in hopes that he remembered more than I do, but all I got was a long tirade about whatever medical condition the guy probably had for his mouth to be like that. He's an annoying medical student now, and sometimes I think maybe the guy didn't mean any harm and was just drugged out of his mind, but this was in the world's safest neighborhood and doesn't explain why or how he showed up at my dad's workplace. When I was a freshman in high school, Alyssa was my role model. Alyssa was a senior, She was so gorgeous, confident, smart, effortlessly stylish, and always owning the room. Back then, I was too shy to talk to her. Seniors are already pretty intimidating to freshmen, but Alyssa was next level intimidating because she was such a queen. I didn't expect anyone to see me the way that I saw Alyssa, but I was pleasantly surprised in my senior year. And in my senior year, I started finding cute little notes in my locker. I wasn't expecting that at all, but I was really flattered. The first one said, "You were beautiful in that dress on Friday." The handwriting was neat and simple with a cute little heart at the end. More notes kept coming in, always in fourth period too, and I got a note every week or two. I know they came during fourth period because I checked my locker before and after every class, and they were all very sweet, and they said things like, "Your smile lights up the hallway. You shine brighter than any star. Your homecoming photos are straight out of a magazine cover. So stunning." There were more notes that I don't remember. They weren't romantic or flirty, and they looked like things that I might have said to Alyssa if we'd ever spoken. I thought maybe they were from a shy underclassman girl, and I had my suspicions. I didn't tell anyone about the notes, though. I really didn't want my friends turning this into an investigation and embarrassing whoever was leaving them. And whoever was leaving these messages, I genuinely thought they meant well. Then in the second semester, my schedule changed. My last class of the day was upstairs near my friend's locker. My friend's last class was near my locker, and we swapped lockers. I forgot all about the notes until my 18th birthday. And that morning, my friend handed me a note that she found in my old locker, and it said, "Happy birthday, princess." At first, she thought the notes were meant for her since any of those compliments could fit her too. But when she realized that the birthday didn't match up, she put two and two together. And come to think of it, I don't think any of the notes ever said my name. I admitted that the notes had been happening all year, and I explained that I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Then my friends launched their investigation that I had been worried about. All the girls in our friend group became detectives trying to solve this little mystery, and one friend, who didn't have a fourth period class, stationed herself by the lockers to survey that area, and it worked. The notes weren't from a shy freshman or even from a boy. They were from a janitor, an older woman none of us knew. We all recognized her, but I don't think any of us had ever talked to her. She'd been leaving these notes for several months, watching me closely enough to comment on my outfits, field hockey games, and even what I posted on Facebook. I saw her at the last field hockey game of the season. She sat quietly in the stands. That was the only time that I noticed her watching me, but I have no idea how I didn't notice her watching me before. None of us brought this up to her, and she hadn't done anything technically wrong, but it all felt so unsettling in a way that's very hard to explain. This happened several years ago. While it may not be as scary as some of the stories here, it was definitely one of the most terrifying, bizarre encounters I've ever had. I'm 33 and I live in the rural Midwest. I was born and raised in my hometown, and with the exception of a few months of living with my father on the East Coast, I've lived here my entire life. I've become pretty acquainted with the majority of the back roads in my area. One such road is an old highway that no longer has the traffic of days prior to the construction of the interstate that runs through the town. It's a long and winding road that offers gorgeous scenic views during the day and a quiet escape from the city at night. Along this road is a small lot with no more than 10 parking spaces, 2 picnic tables, and a single trash can. It's easy to miss due to the heavily wooded area surrounding it and the majority of the rest of the drive to it. And due to its secluded nature, it had played host to a fair share of teenage debauchery. I myself spent many a Friday night smoking away with my friends there. Needless to say, there were a lot of good memories attached to this place, and over the years, it's become one of my favorite spots to venture to when I need peace or solidarity. One night, about 5 years ago, my girlfriend and I are going through a rough patch. We had a big fight due to having to work early in the morning and her deciding to have a party full of her loud and intoxicated friends, and things escalated and I stormed out of the house and started driving towards my favorite spot. As soon as I was out of the city limits, I promptly cranked my angriest metal music and sped down the road, chain-smoking my menthols in an effort to calm down until I finally found the turnoff for the spot. I was happy to find no other cars in the lot, meaning that I wouldn't awkwardly stumble upon 2 lovers engaged in, the act. and I immediately jumped out of the car and sat down on one of the picnic tables, lit a cigarette, and stared at the stars. I sat there for several minutes until I decided to head back to the warmth of my car after hearing some rustling coming from the woods. Not wanting to become a chew toy for a coyote or an angry bobcat, I hustled back to my car and blared my music again, quickly forgetting the sounds that I had just heard. I decided to have one more smoke and then make my way home. I smoked it halfway through when, out of nowhere, I heard pounding coming from the passenger side of my car. I looked over to see a large hand beating against the window. I turned down my music that was still blasting, and as I did, I could hear a very angry voice shouting, "Open the door," while yanking on the door handle. Thankfully, my doors were locked, and after a few moments, the man disappeared from the passenger side, and then reappeared out of the driver's side window while screaming and cursing at me to open the door. He was now punching my window trying to get in. I was frozen, in a mix of confusion and fear, but eventually snapped out of it and threw the car in reverse. It was so dark that I didn't get a good look at the guy, except for a split second he was illuminated by my headlights. He had a black zip-up hoodie with the hood up, a dark gray t-shirt and a ball cap. He was a stocky guy and had to be well over 6 feet as he towered over my Sonata. The only distinguishing feature that I could make out was a very large, dark beard. And I noped out of there real quick. I floored it across the parking lot and back towards the highway, and that's when I heard it. A loud bang that sounded like a gun. I slammed my foot on the pedal, took the first turn I could find, and once I was sure that no one was following me, I slowed down and realized that I was doing 90 on a gravel road. At the time, one of my best friends worked for a nearby gas station, so I made my way to tell him the whole story. We looked over my car thoroughly and found a couple of dents on top of the car and what looked like a boot print on my passenger door. We talked it over and ultimately decided to not call the police. It was a 20-minute drive to the location from the closest town. We were sure that the guy would most likely be gone by the time anyone got all the way out there, and yes, I realized that was probably ignorant of me in hindsight. I'm still baffled by this encounter. I don't know if this guy wanted to rob me, steal my car, or worse, but I'm glad that I made it home in one piece. My husband had remained close to his childhood friend, who I'll call John, well into adulthood. They had met in elementary school and became inseparable ever since. When I was dating my husband and met John, I thought he was such a nice guy. He had a very docile nature and a wholesome character. Everyone felt comfortable around him. John was the type of person that could get along with anyone. He was trustworthy, dependable, and genuinely kind. I was happy that my husband was able to keep such a good friend in this day and age when true friendships are so hard to find. Both me and my husband are estranged from our families, so we were lucky to have someone like John in our lives, and we considered him like family. John was a nerd, like us, so we had many of the same interests. We would meet up every once in a while to grab something to eat, catch a movie, or just hang out at the house playing retro board games and discussing technology. We all three had a love of computers, so my husband and John often shared with each other small programs that they could write. My husband and I built computers for a time, and John would come by to give his opinion and advise us on our projects. I suppose the only curious thing about John at that point was that he never really had a girlfriend. In all the years we knew him, he had always been single. He never even dated. I didn't understand why such a nice guy hadn't found someone yet. Our lives seemed to evolve and change, but John just sort of stayed where he had always been, living with his family and never became involved with anyone romantically. And for a while there, we started thinking that maybe he was gay and was simply scared to reveal it since he had a pretty traditional family who he was very close to. And though we wondered amongst ourselves, we never brought it up to him as it seemed kind of inappropriate. It would be like we were invading his privacy or meddling in his life, and we figured that he would eventually find someone when he was ready. John suddenly moved away to a city that was 3 hours away. When he told us, we thought at first that he had decided to finally move on his own, but we were wrong. He had actually moved into a home that his older sister had bought for her retirement. Since she wasn't ready to retire just yet, she was letting him stay there for the time being, and that's when things began to change. John sort of fell off the map. He wouldn't call, he wouldn't visit, nor ask us to come visit him. My husband and I figured it was because of the distance. Also, he was probably settling into his new place and getting accustomed to a new city. But time continued passing, and I could tell my husband was really missing his friend. And I had to admit that I was too. We had such good times together, and it was so unlike John to disconnect like that. It was so difficult to get in contact with him on the phone, and he wasn't very active on his social media either. And I started to worry about him. I also didn't want my husband to continue distancing himself from his best friend, as it could become permanent. And so I made it my mission to reignite our friendship. I called John and arranged for us to go visit him. Surprisingly, he didn't seem to even acknowledge the fact that it had been about 2 years since we had last seen each other. When we arrived at his place, I was taken a little aback, as I hadn't been expecting what I saw. The house was in a pretty secluded neighborhood in the middle of nowhere, actually, and I didn't know how he could get used to it here, going from a big city and all. And also, I hate to say this, but the house seemed dirty and messy, and John told us that he had transferred his job to this new city, even though they offered him a promotion. He had declined it, and he didn't want to work the extra hours. I looked around and thought that this made sense, since it seemed like John didn't like leaving the house very much, and I chuckled to myself as I thought the house looked more like a bunker than a home. To my dismay, I saw that John had his own room, as if he was still a teenager. In fact, it was decorated as if that is exactly what he still was. It was a mess in there. Computers and computer equipment on the floor, wires everywhere, clothes thrown about all over the place. And John said his sister came to stay every other weekend, so she had the main bedroom for herself. He expressed how he hated for his privacy to be interrupted when she stayed over, but what could he do? And I thought to myself that he could just get his own place, but I didn't say it out loud. We all decided to go to dinner and browse some of the stores in the area, and I couldn't help myself any longer and asked John why we had lost contact. It had become so difficult to get a hold of him lately, and he kind of just shrugged it off and said that he had been so busy with the move that he must have lost track of time. He didn't ever want to lose contact like that with us again, and he appeared genuine, but something felt off to me. His answers were too short and generic, as if there had been some sort of script or he had practiced somehow. My husband told him that he thought that he would have had his own place by now since he moved all the way out here, and John said that it was just financially easier this way. Again, another short and very generic reply. I asked him if he was seeing anyone, and he said that he wasn't in a position to really do that right now, as he really wanted to get his finances in order first. I thought that every reply he gave made sense and was perfectly reasonable, but I also knew that he was lying. Rather, he was hiding. I just didn't know what it was. It was just this nagging feeling that I couldn't shake off, and John just didn't seem like the person that we had known once. My husband and I drove home, kind of confused but glad that we had spent some time with our old friend, and it had been a long time coming. John certainly answered all of the questions that we had been curious about. We believed that now that we had resumed contact that we would see more of him, but that didn't happen. John continued to be distant. His social media continued to not be updated, but I did notice something strange. Since I have him as a friend, I could see whatever he did that was public. And I noticed that he was liking Nickelodeon programs and would sometimes make comments on their posts. The comments would just mention how good a show's last episode was, or how he couldn't wait to find out what happened next. And I found this kind of odd. His comments also seemed to have been written by someone much younger and not a man in his late 30s, who still watched kids' programs at that age. Oh well, I just chalked it up to John always having been sort of innocent, I guess. And besides, some adults still watch cartoons, right? And I suppose there isn't anything too weird then with an adult liking kids' sitcoms. And I didn't mention it to my husband. I'm not sure why. I just felt like I was, once again, a little nosy, invading John's privacy somehow. After all, it's not like I had purposely searched for this information. Besides, what would be the point of even mentioning it? It's just TV shows. And over the next couple of years, John visited us one time. Once again, I had to make a monumental effort to get him to meet with us, even though he traveled our way often to visit his mother. And I got this uncanny feeling that John was avoiding us. Again, as if he was hiding, but hiding what? My husband had pretty much accepted the fact that his friendship had somehow grown apart, and things would never be as they were before. No point of continuing to force the situation, and I resigned myself to that fact as well. It happens. I figured it happened more commonly with childhood friends since people do tend to go in different directions in adulthood. Some more time passed and my husband mentioned John to me. He told me that he had wondered what he'd been up to and how it seemed like no matter how hard he tried, he kept losing contact with him. I could tell my husband was annoyed and couldn't call John because he was upset, and I decided to just give him a call myself. I hoped he still had his same number, and luckily he did. John informed me that he had recently moved back in with his mother. She needed him to be closer to her due to her ailing health, and I told him it was good he was back because we were planning on visiting my father so we could swing by and see him as well. And for the first time, John actually sounded strained and evasive. It didn't sound like himself at all. He told me that he really hadn't been expecting to move back, so he was having trouble getting settled in. And for this reason, he said that he would not be able to meet with us this soon. We would have to meet the following month. And that struck me as strange since his mother's house was the house he grew up in. He had his own bedroom there, so why would it be so difficult to settle in? I accepted his wishes, though, and told him that the following month we would plan on hanging out for sure. Nothing could have prepared me and my husband for what happened next, though. As the month we were supposed to meet approached, my husband called me to come downstairs and look at the TV. He then said to hurry, and I thought he was just being dramatic since he sometimes did so to get me to go see what he was watching, so I reluctantly went downstairs. I immediately noticed that he was white as a sheet. Now he had my attention, and I asked him what in the world was wrong now. He told me to look at this as he holds the remote in his hand, pointing it to the TV. And I sat down next to him, and he starts playing a news segment that was showing a courtroom. Suddenly, John is led in by a bailiff wearing an orange suit with his hands and feet shackled, and I literally did a double take as I couldn't believe that it was the same person. I thought my husband was joking and was playing a video showing John or a look-alike like John, but there was no denying it was truly him. His full name was right there on the screen. The newscaster said that yet another man, John, has just been arrested in connection with one of the largest child trafficking rings that has been dismantled in recent history. John was just one of the many individuals who had been caught when the police successfully obtained their information from a website on the dark web that had been shut down for featuring and spreading CSAM, or child exploitation material. The investigation had been going on for a few years. Both of our mouths were wide open as we stared at the TV in disbelief. My husband told me that he had been searching for a local TV show when he came across this. He told me he just couldn't believe it. He must have watched it over 20 times before he called me downstairs to see for myself, and I was speechless. Sometime later, when the initial shock subsided, my husband went online to search more information, and it appears that John's mother's home and his sister's home had both been raided, and they found hundreds of child exploitation content on his computer. John must have been collecting them since his youth. There also had been a DNA match. There wasn't much more information than that, and I was thankful for it as neither of us wanted to know what exactly that meant. John is going to be going to prison for the next 30-plus years, and he'll be an old man by the time he makes it to his first parole hearing and would have to wear an ankle monitor for the remaining years if he was ever to actually be released. And we saw that his sister removed his name from the house that she had bought. She also removed all mention of him from her social media. And for his family to have disowned him, the details of what John did must be truly horrific, and it's obvious his family has no doubt of his guilt. I feel so sorry for his poor mother. She was such a sweet lady. She had already lost 2 sons, and now she lost a third. My husband and I removed John from our contact list and any trace of him from our social media as well. We severed all ties. We decided to not even contact his family, and we will not be visiting him in prison either, though we have so many unanswered questions. This event broke my husband somehow. He has become very paranoid and distrustful of other people, and he's refused to make any new friends. I can understand him, though. It's life-changing when you realize that you never truly know anyone, regardless of how close you are to them. Not really, anyway. The sweet, humble guy that had slept in our home and shared so many great times with us had been an illusion. A very good magic trick. It's as if he hadn't ever existed except in our own minds. John had been hiding something after all, and he had been hiding that he was really a monster. I was a young guy in college driving back to campus from somewhere when I ran out of gas. It was getting dark, maybe 6 or 7 p.m. When I realized the gas had run out, I had turned off the main street, and then with my car's remaining momentum, I glided until I stopped in front of some random house. I sat in the car, trying to think if there was anyone I knew with a car who had stayed on campus for winter break. No dice. So then I resigned myself to the fact that I needed to walk to the nearest station, fill up the little gas can from my trunk, and walk back. I grabbed the canister, and before I started walking, I leaned on the front of my car and looked up directions. And just then, a woman pulled into the driveway. She was also college age and wearing some sort of server's outfit, like she worked in fast food. I was parked right out front of her house when she noticed me. She approached, a little hesitant, and asked if I needed help. And I said honestly, yeah, I'd just run out of gas, and according to my phone, we were kind of a far walk from the Chevron. She looked at me like she had just seen a ghost, though. And at first I chalked it up to it getting late, me being a guy and her trying to gauge if I was actually screwing with her. But it really struck me how afraid she suddenly looked. I tried to assure her that I had the gas can and didn't need to go with her or anything, that I could actually pay for it. And she took the can but refused any money. I waited there for a while. She came back, handed me the canister, and then just stood there for a second, and I could tell that she was deciding whether or not to say something. Then she just straight up asked, "Do you want to hear something weird?" "Of course," I said. And she says, "Today at work, I got this prank call, but it was a weird prank call and all that. It was just the guy on the other line kept asking me over and over, 'Have you ever run out of gas?'" And after she told me, we both just kind of chuckled, not really knowing what to say except thanks and take care. And it genuinely gives me chills every time I think about it. This happened about 10 years ago in an area between Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. My friend, we'll just call him R, and I used to regularly go to Tacoma to sing karaoke at a bar there. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen the city of Tacoma during the day. Now anyways, it's about 1 or 2 in the morning and we're heading back to Seattle and we have to stop for gas. He pulls over at this station and I'm buzzed and feeling good, so this creepy station doesn't even really register with me. As I'm sitting, messing with the radio, suddenly my door swings open. I only saw a flash of him because it was all blindingly quick, but he was kind of medium height, dark-skinned, like too much tanning, that is, and had a blank stare and tattered clothing. I remember he had a black jacket too, like leather or something, but it was torn and holey. So here I am trying to pull the door closed, and I'm realizing this man is very strong, and he almost won the tug-of-war with me trying to slam the door closed, and if my adrenaline hadn't kicked in, I don't know. I do finally manage to get it closed after maybe only a few seconds and immediately start looking around for my friend, panicked and concerned and confused. R had already been yelling at the guy to get the F away from my car, and surprisingly, the man listens. R isn't the most intimidating-looking guy or anything, but maybe the guy didn't want to cause a scene. I don't recall there being anyone else outside the station with us that night, but R was being very loud and forceful. So, I'm watching the man walk away, and he's not looking back at us or making a sound that I can hear, which is what made this entire thing more unusual. R gets back in the car, and he's usually calm, but deadpan, like when you see something terrible but you're too scared to move. I look to see where he's looking, and he's looking at the creepy guy who's now facing us with that same emotionless stare, just watching us leave the pump and back towards the street. And my eyes are on him the entire time, too. We book it out of there, and that was the end of that. And to this day, I don't stop at a gas station at night at all if I can help it, unless another car is there or it's on a busy street. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations.